Okay.
So I've started recording. I'm going to share my screen, and it's 11 now. So away we go. Off you go, Des.
Okay. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Project Managers Network Conference. Now, this is our third virtual event, so we're hopefully getting better at it. But any glitches, we'll overcome. Today's theme is we all have lived with COVID for the last 6 months, and it's a new normality. So we decided we'd focus today on the new reality for project and program management during COVID-19. We're delighted we have speakers from the Grangegorman Development Authority and from the housing agencies to share their experiences over the last number of months with their projects. And I'll hand over to Des in a moment, and he will do an introduction, and he'll also go through the various speakers we have today, and hopefully you'll find it a very interesting day. Just on some housekeeping matters, we hope to be finished by 1:45. Just so you're all aware, all your microphones and cameras have been muted and turned off, so we can't see into your kitchens, but equally you won't be able to speak to us, you won't be able to interact by oral questions, but as many of you are probably well aware now, with WebEx there's a facility to ask Q&A, and if you touch the bottom of your screens, you'll see I think there's 3 dots, and you'll find a Q&A button there, so please, we'll be very keen for you to add your questions during the morning and to add to the event. While it does never replaces the physical networking we've been able to do in the past, at least it will give people a chance to input. Also, we will run a couple of polls during the morning, and we very much appreciate your participation in those. Now, we have a busy morning ahead, so I'm just going to hand over to Des Dowling, Secretary Des Dowling, to do the introduction. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Bridget, and good morning, everybody, and welcome to our virtual conference. I'm joined, of course, today by my colleague, Brigadier General Adrian O'Murco, who will speak to you later on. Just a few brief words of introduction, really. We're fortunate in having a very good lineup of speakers, and I'll come to those in a moment. But firstly, I'm conscious that people come to these network events from a variety of kind of backgrounds and contexts. Our starting point really is the Department of Defence and the Defence Forces are the lead and sponsor of our Public Service Action 10 to embed programme and project management. As many colleagues who've joined these conferences before, I've outlined, if you like, the approach we've taken to that, which was to seek to build on the huge range of experience and work that's there in the public service already, but see what we could do in some sense to build on that, to draw together, to share it. So from that perspective, if you like, while we have our own, of course, in-house resource and experience of these things, we're learning all of the time, and today is a further case in point where we'll see some very specific but also experiences which I think have a broader application. So in progressing the action to do with project management, in the first instance, of course, we were trying to build on what's there already, and one of those things was a network which, if you like, is today's a living example of it. The network has been both a useful way of having contact with a whole range of experience, but also hopefully over time to see actually what's going to be helpful to people in the project management and broader program delivery area. Secondly, we focused on seeing how we could support that through building up a series of case studies, and they're now available, if you like, and we can publicize the sites where you can access those. And those case studies give very real practical experience of individual project management cases, successes, but also where there's been challenges as well. The third practical step that we sought to support was the production of a handbook for project management, again, building on one that was there already for the civil service, but broadening that out into a full public service application. And like the case studies, that will continue to evolve and develop over time. And we're always open to suggestions as to how those things can be improved. We've given a fair bit of emphasis to training, and we've worked very collaboratively with the OGP Commercial Skills Academy, because of course the whole procurement can be a very significant part of project management, and vice versa. Also with One Learning, the Institute of Public Administration, on others, if you like, in our subgroup, which deals with training, particularly in the third level sector. Looking ahead, we've said, and again, I hope that we can draw from today, these individual elements, of course, are very significant in terms of achieving success, ultimately better public outcomes. But governance of project management, I think, is increasingly coming into focus. There's a variety of approaches. It's never going to be one size fits all, but certainly there are lessons to be learned, and to really get the best possible return from project management, that governance piece is absolutely critical. Certainly from a defence viewpoint, in implementing our sectoral policy under the White Paper on Defence, we have adopted a project management-based approach, and that has allowed us to progress not just our traditional projects such as procurement of major defence platforms like ships and aircraft, but also policy measures as well. It's not all easy, of course, and part of the learning for us is seeing how we ensure that we can embed that overall approach throughout the organisation, taking account of the different skill mix, but also trying to ensure the best governance. And among that is, I suppose, is the focus on leadership from the top, and I hope myself and Adrian, among others, if you like, are trying to ensure that that's the case. So that governance piece will continue to be important, and we're trying to see through our action team under OPS 2020 how we can draw that together effectively. The last theme that I've mentioned to colleagues here in the network before is the whole area of sustainability, and I hope again that we may draw from this, where you have, for example, a development agency like the GDA, how do you actually sustain the kind of skills that you need over time? And that's true of all of us, and also across at an overall public service level. So here we are. I think we have a great opportunity for further learning in the area. I appreciate people's participation in the conference, and I hope that you get something useful from it. And as Brigitte said, I hope as well also we'll get some very kind of good and questions and discussion, which can often be very useful for the follow-ups. So let me just turn to the presentations for today, and I suppose they really fall into two parts. The first, if you like, comes from the Grangegorman Development Agency, and we have three speakers for today, and many thanks to the speakers, of course, for their contributions. And we have Conor Sreenan, who's the Director of Strategy and Design at the GDA. Conor's an architect by background. He has worked in the private sector in various places, both at home and abroad, and also then in the education sector. You joined, I think, Conor, you joined the GDA in 2017, and now, as I say, he's in that overall role of Director of Strategy and Design. Following Conor, we have Pádraig Ballantyne, who has also worked in private practice, being a civil and structural engineer. He has a couple of very important projects at the moment in terms of both the primary education and also the site infrastructure associated with the GDA. Our final speaker in the Grangegorman Development Agency slot is Des Marmion, who's also, he is a structural engineer, and he's worked in both project management and design. At the moment, among other things, he's dealing with the residential care neighbourhood, very important up in that part of Dublin, of course, and then the Grangegorman site itself. So three, I think, very useful contributions in the offing there. The second part of our programme for this morning is a contribution from Peter Hess, who is the Director of Services with the Housing Agency. Peter has been associated with housing issues for many years, at present as a principal in the Housing Agency and a quantity surveyor by background. He's going to speak to us about the pyrite remediation scheme, and particularly from the perspective of the experience of dealing with COVID. So I think it's apt that we have, I suppose, that aspect to our network presentations for this morning. So if I may, with that introduction, I'll turn to you, Conor, and welcome you, and we look forward to a very successful morning. Thank you all.
Thanks very much, Des. Just see if all these dry runs pay off. Can you see that screen there? Des, can you see the?
You can see that, Conor.
Okay.
Okay, great. You can hear me. All right, I'll get going. There's quite a bit to get through. Thanks a lot for having us along. We're delighted to be here, the three of us, to represent the broader agency. We're here to share and to listen, probably more importantly. As Des has outlined, we're doing a three-hander today, and I guess that's reflective of the team-based approach at the agency. The title of our presentation is Uncertain Futures and Invisible Cities. And by that, we mean, I guess, with respect to uncertain futures, COVID has been a very visceral and unsettling reminder that no future is certain. And maybe that's okay, but at the moment it's a particular concern. And Invisible Cities is a borrowed title from a novel, from an Italian novel from the 1970s, the thrust of which is that there are as many versions of city as there are those who experience it and the manner in which they do. And I think the other light that COVID has cast upon us generally is the nature of city, of what we want from city and how we want to make city. And that's something very close to our heart at the Development Agency. So to frame our presentation today, we started off with two reference points to try and focus what we might share with you guys. The first of which was what's on the screen at the moment, which is, you'll have to indulge us, it's a very shortened and redacted version of the vision behind Action 10 from the Public Service 2020 project. And that being a vision to strengthen the discipline in general, to make sure that as a state, as a country, we have the capacity to deliver on what we need to do. And so we put this up and we kind of focused on it for quite a while. And I guess the themes or the values of connecting, identifying, sharing, building on, reviewing and sustaining effort, they very much reflect the values that we have at the agency. So that was the kind of first reference point. The second reference point is an extract from the foreword of the Public Spending Code by the SecGen in Deeper, and just a very short extract from a presentation, a workshop address, just prior to the publication of the new revised Public Spending Code. And I guess the Public Spending Code guides a lot of what we do in the agency. And of particular interest in this piece was the reminder that all of us entrusted with spending public money, that we've got to continually hone our focus on interventions, and also a very blunt reminder too that groupthink is the enemy. And I think maybe the conference today and the work that you guys do is a testament to the fact that, you know, groupthink is probably something that these sessions help to erode. So, as I said, it's a three-parter. We're going to give an introduction to Grangegorman to set some context. There's quite a bit in it, but I'll try and move rapidly or reasonably quick as I can through it. But I think it's important that you have some context to understand how and why and what we operate within. Then Porrick's going to talk about a school project for younger people, and Des then is going to talk about a housing project for the elderly. And we thought it would be interesting to cover that spectrum. We've got a large site and a lot of stakeholders and a lot of agendas, but that spectrum from primary or national school children to those with a housing need, from the older part of our population, and also those with a defined mental health need. So Porrick and Des are going to talk through the lenses of COVID in terms of the impact COVID has had on those projects, and then also just talk about design resilience and how that's played out in the projects. So to start with, in terms of context, this is an aerial photograph of Grangegorman from the mid-20th century. And we're showing this to demonstrate that at that point, there was effectively a tale of two cities in this part of the North Inner City. So for those who aren't familiar with the Grangegorman site, it's nestled between Stoneybatter to the west and Fibbsborough to the east, the North Circular Road to the north, and Smithfield to the south. And that blue section that you can see in the bottom right-hand corner, that marks a kind of a seam line in the city from the 19th century and from the 18th century, which demarked an infrastructural heart of the North Inner City. So at the bottom of that image is the Broadstone Canal, the Royal Canal Basin building, Broadstone Railway Station, which was the terminus of the Galway-Dublin Railway line. And it was quite a watery, bustling infrastructural heart, one of a few at that time in Dublin's city. And then starkly, literally across the wall, was the site of Grangegorman. So from the early origins in the Dublin House of Industry, the Dublin district, the Richmond district lunatic asylum, the various penitentiaries, infirmaries, and so on and so forth. And it was a site of institutions, predominantly psychiatric, and then moving on into the 20th century was the home of St. Brendan's psychiatric site, and literally walled off from the city with a very high, 3-metre odd high calc limestone wall, which circumnavigated the site and still does today, with the one distinction of a public street that cuts through the site. So that's Grangegorman Lower highlighted there in white. So to give you some of the background to the project in terms of the politics, back in 2002 there was a government decision to redevelop St. Brendan's site. Largely at the time the driver was to consolidate and relocate what was then Dublin Institute of Technology from 30 plus sites in the city to one co-located site at Grangegorman. Dublin DIT has since become the Technological University Dublin, which is the first technological university in the state. And then on to 2005, when the Grangegorman Development Agency Act was passed. And so on the right-hand side is an extract from the short definition of that act. It's word for word. So it's relatively succinct itself, but when you focus in even a bit further, it's an act to make provision for the development of an area in Grangegorman as a location for education, health and facilities. And when you hold that in even tighter again, there is an interpretation of it which drives the work of Des Porrick, myself and the team, which is an act to make city, which sounds quite glib and simple, but it's a pretty profound mandate. This drawing is an extract from the Act. So those who are familiar with Grangegorman will recognise the pink shape in the centre, and that's split by that road, which was up in the previous slide. That's the statutorial definition of the site. But actually, within the Act, there's a statutorial definition of the neighbourhood, which is the cyan or the turquoise area around it. So we actually have a remit which stretches from Mater Hospital in the northeast to the forecourts in the southeast, over to the Phoenix Park, and up to the beginning of Cabra and the expansion of the city in the 20th century. This is an extract from the Act again, and it defines very clearly who our stakeholders are. So the Minister, we operate under the Ministry of Education and in its various new forms, higher education, and then DIT, which is now TU Dublin, the Health Service Executive, and then more broadly the citizenry, so the communities from the neighbourhood around us. 2006, the GDA itself was formed. That's a version of us on the right-hand side. Largely, there's a few people missing. Give or take, we're about 20 to 25 people. We're a motley crew with a lot of varied and rich experience in the built environment. Engineers, architects, conservation architects, surveyors, financial controllers, construction experts. Those are the construction background, corporate governors, public art coordinators, information managers, administrators and communicators, and town planners. So we're incredibly diverse. We're quite small. It has the advantage of allowing us to, lock horns and get over issues quite quickly without carrying too much baggage. And then the site itself. So very, very quickly, so that organ shape hopefully is recognisable. On the right-hand side is effectively, beyond it will be Phibsborough, on the left-hand side Stoneybatter, and the dash line cutting through it is the Grangegorman Lower Road. The site is a tilted piece of ground from a high point of 30 metres in the northwest corner to 12 metres above sea level in the southeast. So what that means is it affords incredible views back across the south inner city from our developments. The site itself runs to about, give or take, 30 hectares, and to put that into some context, Toytown Cooper Village in New York is pretty much the same size as us in Lower Manhattan, also bisected by a public thoroughfare. The King's Cross Central development in London would be slightly smaller than our development. Parc de Villette, you'd fit just under 2 of us into it. Would be slightly bigger than Alexanderplatz in Berlin, and would be the very same size as Parc de Cinq in Brussels. So then just to touch on the development process, just to let you know what we do predominantly. We do lots of things, but at the heart of the agency is about a third of our makeup is project coordinators, and they're very much the engine of the agency. And so the development process is central to our activities and mandate that we have under the Act. The site has been master planned, so in an abstract sense, the site has been divided up into various zonal uses, reflecting the need of our stakeholders from TU Dublin, the Health Service Executive, the Department of Education directly, and the community in terms of open space and amenity. So from that master plan, we have a series of development plots, and more importantly, or as importantly, we have master planned the vision for the infrastructure in the public realm, so the spaces between the buildings. A large thrust of the master plan is connectivity, so to link, to reveal the city. This site obviously has a history of its own, so we're not trying to reinvent that or erase that, but we're trying to reveal it and link it back into the city. So the linkages between buildings is core. So what we do on a day-to-day basis is through the Capital Works Management Framework, we procure predominantly architect-led design teams. Those architect-led design teams procure on our behalf building contractors through the public work contract suite. Those contractors develop the plots, and then we transfer the title of those plots back to the various stakeholders. And so that's a cycle that we continue and have been at since 2007, 2008, and will be at for some time yet. Until such point as we've developed out the site and the statutorial boundary, which is indicated as a decimal here, becomes invisible or less important, and what becomes more important is a connected piece of livable city in the north inner city. So just to give you some retrospective timelines and prospective timelines in terms of our overall development plan. In 2008, there was an international competition for land use master plan, and then following the successful winner of that master plan, the Act stipulated that we would then develop a strategic plan to guide the development of the site on into 2010, and the site was designated a strategic development zone. So very crudely, what that means is we have outline planning permission for just under 400,000 square meters of building between new build and the refurbishment of the 11 protected structures that remain on the site. So that, as developers, that gives us a huge amount of development certainty, so long as we stick within a series of relatively clear development guidelines. We get planning permission for major projects in the same time that you will get planning permission for a kitchen extension, and that's on the back of a huge amount of consultation in that early 5-year period of plan-led thinking. Then 2011, a big shift in central administration, and not a great time in terms of the economy, which pretty much called into jeopardy the whole basis of such a big project and such an ambitious project. Thankfully, at that time, through the judicious use of very, very little money, there were a bunch of projects up and running, and there was a bunch of plan-led thinking continuing, which the outcome of which was the GDA planning scheme. So that's within the Dublin City Development Plan. So we are now part of the long-range view of the city, and so in as much as planning applications are assessed under the development plan, we're formally part of that development plan. So all of that early work put the project in a very good position when the stimulus, the $2 billion stimulus package was announced in 2012, and we were shovel ready, let's say, and top of the heap, which allowed then in 2013 for the continuation of previous projects that were underway. So the first project for the HSC, which is the Phoenix Care Centre, segregated psychiatric residential care building, and that was rehoming people who had been resident on the site to allow for the development of other projects. Some ongoing demolitions, the adaptive reuse of protected structures, continuing on through 2014, on into 2015, with lots of again, stabilisation, site infrastructure, pipes in the ground, public amenity, playground, which is key in developing social capital, and then a big milestone in 2015 with the Greenway building, which is the new building for TU Dublin on site. Then on into 2017, the second project for the HSE, which is the Primary Care Centre. In 2018, the height guidelines from the centre have come in since that time over, let's say, local authority development plans. So we're now in the process of reviewing our strategic development zone with respect to hitting the compact urban growth agenda of the National Development Plan and the National Planning Framework. So that's, I guess, a key change in the statutory or regulatory context. Then on up to where we were at the beginning of this year. So I guess the landing of COVID I think the first case of COVID in Ireland was registered on the 29th of February. At that time, we had a number of projects under construction, and one of which is concluded, which is our district heating energy centre. We have two very significant quad projects, which were public-private partnerships. So our procurement partner on that is the National Development Finance Agency, and then some directly procured capital projects. The Lower House, which is a protected structure, Park House, which is the refit of a late 20th century office building, and Ratdown House, which is a protected structure. On into looking into where we're headed in 2021, we've just started on site with the printmaking workshop and the field sports changing project, and also in 2022, the Educate Together National School, which is the project Cork is going to talk about. Also in that year, the academic hub, we're about to go to tender for over the next coming month or so, which is the library effectively for TU Dublin. On into 2023, the third quad, which is the West Quad, largely the college business, but also the conferring hall in Grangegorman, so the replacement in practice of St. Patrick's Cathedral, where TU currently, or DIT, historically graduated from. The relocation of Focus Institute, which represents the development of the Greenway building into an innovation hub with the master plan. The residential care neighbourhood project, which is the housing for the elderly, that Deb is going to talk about. And then indoor sport, which has recently been successful in some large-scale infrastructure funding on sport. So I guess that gives you, from 2008 to 2024, a snapshot of where we're at. And I guess the hope is, despite the uncertainty that's generated by COVID, as a state, we're embarking on a new national stimulus, and we hope to be very much part of that. So this is the original vision. So this is the master plan from 2008, and this is a very early sketch of that master plan. Then this is an update drawing of where that master plan is at the moment, where we've intentionally drawn the three-dimensional context of the city beyond our statutory definition. The red or the ochre represents buildings that are existed or we have within our site refurbished or recovered, and the cyan or the blue, the darker blue, that represents projects that we have very well developed plans for. And the green in the trees actually represents grass and trees that exist or planned. So they're not just representative of what might be nice. They're actually trees that exist, and all of that is very important to us in terms of public ground. So to very quickly give you some more concrete examples of what we have done on site and what we're doing on site, some very early work in public ground. So playing fields to the right and left, and down in the mid right-hand foreground is the playground, which was one of the first early projects developed on site. The Phoenix Care Centre, which was the first HSE project. I guess you can see, hopefully here in this image, that we've, together with the HSE, developed quite a good practice of pushing the typology of healthcare buildings. This building is quite generous in its double courtyard form and single corridors, which undoubtedly attracts additional capital investment, but the clinical outcomes are proving to be, in terms of the life cycle of the project, paying back manifold. And so Des will talk a little bit about the innovations in the version in Grangegorman of the community nursing unit that he's leading out on. The adaptive reuse of protected structures for TU Dublin in the heart of the site, and then the second project developed for the health service executive, which is very representative of the past and future. On the left is the new building primary care centre by Taylor McCartney, architect, and that project also involved the refurbishment of the laundry building, which is a protected structure on the right. So bringing those two pieces together. And then importantly, beyond in the mid-foreground, you can see the back of the North Circular Road houses. So that language is persistent throughout the site, and the blurring of those edges is very important to us. Then on into New Dublin Central Quad, which is a project which is on site at the moment, 50,000 square metre quad building around an existing tree. So that tree, again, it's not a representation of some ugly version of the future. That tree, a huge amount of effort has been expended to actually retain that tree. That tree exists and it's protected, and the building works its way around it. And then the TU Dublin East Quad, which is to the south of the clock tower, which you can see on the left there. Then the lower house, again, another protected structure, which we are nearing completion on towards the end of this year. And so that's the recovery of a very significant 4,000 square metre protected structure to act as a very lively support space for TU Dublin. Then the academic hub will be from inside of this 12,500 square metre library that goes on out to tender very shortly, led by a team of architects at Don and Toomey, who are leading a multidisciplinary design team, and then the adjacent to it is the West Quad, considerably larger building, but also, I guess, again, pushing the typology of what a quadrangle is. So there's quite a layered inner world of this and permeable world of this dense 1,000 square metre college of business. And what we're looking at there is the down conferring hall, and that's being designed by a team led by Heenan and Pang Architects. Then the school. This is the school, the Educate Together National School that Warwick is going to talk about, and the residential care neighbourhood that Des is going to talk about. Just in terms of project and programme management, just to give you some perspective on how we aggregate all of the projects, this is a very intentionally, let's say, done aggregation of all the projects that we would run at any one point in time. And the point of it is to be accessible and legible by a broad audience, but also to allow us to map contingencies and dependencies across projects. A word on governance, which Des at the opening made reference to. At the heart of our governance is the project coordinator, and the project coordinator heads up the project team. That project team is the key lead with stakeholder user groups, whether that's HSE, the department, or Team Dublin, and also the project coordinator appointing the design team. That project team then reports up to a program team. That program team takes on board the work of various user groups from time to time. For example, we're working through with a COVID user group within TU Dublin at the moment to aggregate all of the concerns and the issues that they might have with respect to the physical stock of buildings. And then also on the left, you can see that we, at program team level, are continuously engaging with industry, whether that be stock market vendors, or the contractors that we hope to build with, or the design teams that we hope to design with in the future, engagement with public bodies and peer groups, much like what we're doing today, and then more formal technical reviews, for example, the Department of Education. Program team reports up to program board, which in the parlance of the public spending code is the sponsoring agency. Then the GDA board, so that's our CDO, Ger Casey, that's the board, who are largely the approving authority, again in the language of the public spending code. That board also has the engagement of a department oversight committee. And then in the case of projects which run past a gross cost of €100 million and in line with public spending code, we offer up for approval to deeper finance and ultimately the government cabinet. So then just a quick word on the public spending code. So this is, I guess, we're very conscious that the public spending code has been rebooted, and we think we welcome the reboot of it. And we're very conscious of the fact that it takes primacy over the capital work spending code. So just what we've mapped out here are the life cycles, and then importantly in terms of governance and project management and program management, the decision gates. So the decision gate 0 to get out of the traps after we've defined confirmed a strategic need for a project, and then the approval in principle at 1 to continue then and procure and spend money in design, and then the two big business end decision gates 2 and 3, the approval to go to tender, and then the approval to go into contract. So that's what guides our capital projects. This magenta band just reflects the various projects that would aggregate into a program, and then we've got to somehow map that into the governance at the GDA board level. So, for example, this mapping of decision gate 2 and decision gate 3, this is how we would communicate to our board or the various subcommittees of the board that we would be giving them some forecasting that in July we're coming with papers for approval to go to tender, and that we'll be back to them in January with seeking permission to enter into contract. So we would map that out for all of the projects that we saw in the previous program. And a quick word on practice. I mean, this disparate set of dots represents a project. All projects are a mess, and we don't mean that as a pejorative. We mean it as a positive, and we like to acknowledge the fact that we're not a perfect client. We don't have perfect design teams, and we don't get perfect contractors, but there are gaps there, and we work with great teams, both in the contracting sphere and the design sphere, and they always invariably add value to a project where we didn't think there was value to be had. But despite that, there always remain massive blind spots. So a large amount of the project and program management that we do is operating these blind spots, not shying away from them, but acknowledging the fact there are gaps and blind spots. A good example of this would be, we've been working for the last 2 years on a particular blind spot with respect to design team competence around the public contract. So we went through a kind of a measured phase of acknowledging the teams that was a gap, making a safe space for them to come into us and for us to just lay everything out on the table and see what their current and recent experience with the contract is. That's the agenda that was left. Then collating all of that, drawing breath, going back and working with the Office of Government Procurement, the authors of the contract, to go back to them and be very honest and say, look, we work with great teams, but there is a gap, and that gap is posing a massive risk to the development of capital projects. Will you work with us in developing a workshop? So working with the OGP to construct a one-day, two-parter workshop, bringing the teams in, and then finally with a smaller group trying to round off that blind spot by asking the Office of Public Works to come in as the major procurer of architecture in the state, to talk through with us and be open with us about projects that have gone wrong and mistakes that have been made. And so they very generously did that. So kind of incrementally working with gap that we've identified as blind spot external to us in the design team. And then turning the focus internally to within the agency. If the project coordinators are the engine and the point leads of projects, then we thought it was incumbent that we would also be open about any gaps that we had with respect to the public works contract. We don't administer contracts. We have EORs that do that, but it's very important that we, the clients, are aware of the pitfalls and risks and gaps. So this represents a series of workshops that we designed internally as a group, and got some external expertise to work through with us the public works contracts. You can see here May through July, 3 examples out of 4 or 5 workshops focusing on different aspects of risk. So claim determination proposals, contract condition 4 management, and then disputes, which there will always be. So finding out how to manage that, or how to navigate that ground of dispute. So I'm going to just wrap up with to give you again some concrete versions of how we project and program manage, particularly under the lens of COVID. So after very early on in March, I think March, around mid-March, the schools closed. We effectively migrated online. So one of the first management tools we rolled out was an operation capacity audit across all our design teams. So this is a version of the design team where we sought to audit the operation capacity across all of the key disciplines: design team leads, engineering leads, quantity surveyors, fire engineers, PSTPs, employer representatives, design site fires. And it was very much an open focus on staff wellbeing, staff levels, working arrangements, then info technology management, contingency planning we had in place. And we left a column which is other, which was the space for them to dump in any other concerns they had with the very swift migration and atomization of the industry. And so those bits that you see highlighted in red, then that gave us the capacity to pull together the operational capacity audit across all of our teams and to pull those red aspects up to a risk register so that we could manage them in a live fashion. And then we carried out an impact assessment across the project. So this is this represents a snapshot of the journey we've been on with a particular project that was on site. And again, what we're trying to do is audit between design and works, and you'll see when Des and Porrick present, they also they're two kind of natural containers for us: the design side, the technical services side, and the work side, and the contracting side. And so focusing in on particularly the action. So we've quite a really busy, intense period of keeping in contact with the OGP, keeping in contact with our EOs, and making sure that we were protecting contractual positions on behalf of the state, but also making sure that we were being reasonable clients. We're always very conscious that our behaviour will always be measured through the eyes of reasonability and through the mouth of the conciliator, and should that happen. And then at a programme level, this is just to give you an example, pretty heavily redacted, but to give you an example of how we assessed then at an aggregate level. A programme of works in Grangegorman might involve anywhere between 2 and 5 capital projects. And so we're operating under a kind of a defined strategy that's agreed with our stakeholders. And so I guess the uncertainty that unfolded with COVID, we were very conscious not to panic, to develop measured responses, and to keep our eye on the strategic direction that we had been following, but also then to assess the impact. So in this case, in terms of impacts, project impacts, program impacts, so teasing out the operational impacts for our stakeholders, then obviously cost. And so, you know, with our team, our finance team, we, with some difficulty, started to make some assessments on what the cost impact of COVID might be. Obviously, that was a movable feast and still is to a large extent, although there's a degree of settling down on that, and certainly forecast on deflation moving into 2021, and then viability and threats. So, what contingency action, what residual assumptions and opportunities and next steps. And so, just to say that this slide represents 2 scenarios that we tested, and that's 2 scenarios out of probably anywhere up to 10 scenarios on that particular program of work. And so living with COVID, so our risk management, and apologies, this is heavily redacted, there's quite a bit of sensitive information. This is a program team risk register. And so what this does is this takes all of the risk and concern from our design teams through the filter of our project coordinators and on up to program team, which is the group that reports up to the sponsoring agency, the building authority. And what it does is it takes effectively a top 10 corporate risks to delivery, whether that's financial or operational strategic risks, and then the bottom half of the slide is projects. So we focus in and we ask the question of, you know, what is the one single risk that you would identify as a project coordinator to the project. And so you can see there very early on, this is from July, and so the movement on risk 2 was stabilizing, and that was design team service compromised due to COVID impact and productivity. The current control was migration in line. The impact capacity audit completed and monitored. So that was the slide that I showed a couple of slides ago. And then some actions. So design team program monitoring ongoing, and staggering of review and approval processes. So that was one concrete action that we could do as a client to support our teams to stagger out the review process of a capital project. For any one of these projects, we might have a set of, 1,000 drawings to review the team. And so by working with them to stagger that, we were able to support them in the challenges they had with remote working. And so constantly with risk, risk is the bread and butter of a lot of our coordinator sessions. And we're not under the illusion that risk disappears, but risk always exists, and risk can be a driver for making good decisions. But what we always are very conscious of for those above us in terms of governance is that we track the direction of risk. So you can see on the left is the movement of risk, or the new entry of risk, and then the residual rank of risk. So very, very, very quickly at a squint, you can see that wave of risk moving through, and you can see if it's been managed by the executive and by the coordinators. So that's it. That's me done. I'm going to mute and I'm going to hand over now. Next up is Porrick, who's going to talk about the school. And just to give you some context, this is this drawing again. So again, orange or ochre is stuff that exists. Blue is stuff that we have well-developed plans for. So you can see the school there to the right-hand side, and the housing to the left. So Porrick, I'm going to mute.
Thanks, Conor. So good morning, everyone. My name is Porrick. I'm a project coordinator, and I'm responsible for coordinating the delivery of the Dublin 7 Educate Together school. So just a bit about the school itself. Conor's given you an idea of the campus setting. If you just move on to the next slide, Conor, please. So again, this is a section taken from the map that Conor showed earlier on, and what you have is the school there in the middle of the unit. It's a 5-story building. It's bounded to the west-hand side by the primary care centre. That's an existing operating facility. To the southwest is the central quad, which is under construction, and then you might be able to make out the outline building, which is a future engineering block. So they comprise the parts of the campus related to the school, and then to the northeast of the school you have the city, and that's where we interact with the city. Grangegorman Upper bounds the STZ boundary, and then you have Ratdown Road there as well. The junction there is GDA have contributed to and have led the design of the public realm space, which responds to the residential needs and also takes account of the school needs as well. So in relation to the school itself, it's a challenging site. It's a triangular shaped site. There's a 5-metre level difference across the site, which has resulted in varying external areas being at different levels. The development comprises a 5-story, 24-classroom teaching block, and then you have a separate building, which is a general purpose hall with a rooftop court. And also in the teaching block, I forgot to mention, there's a special needs unit as well. There's bicycle parking provided for on the site also. And the team who were successful in the procurement is led by Grafton Architects, and they brought along with them a very strong multidisciplinary team comprising ACOM, ARP, Austin Reddy's, I3PT, and MSA. So the project is currently at stage 3, and if you go to the next slide, please. So the visual here sets out the timeline from when COVID had an impact, and on the top part you can see various dates which capture the OGP guidance that was issued to support the various government agencies in terms of how to deal with projects that were at varying stages. The initial advice that would have come out would have been focused on the projects that would have been live on the ground. But they did indicate that for projects that were that tenders returned but hadn't been awarded, that they should hold tight really until there was greater certainty. The school is a particular example of that. We had tenders received prior to COVID, and we were in the middle of the tender evaluation process. So there was a lot of to and fro during this period in relation to other procurement matters. We were closely monitoring the impact of COVID and what that would have on the project. And as Conor noted earlier, the agency came together to kind of to consider the guidance that would have come out and kick around ideas about how that will be applied to different projects, which we're at various stages. So next slide, Conor, please. So Conor has mentioned already the impact of the COVID that it had on the operation capacity of our design teams. So just looking at the impact on the design team's roles and responsibilities, in my particular, in the school project, the design was obviously fixed because we'd gone out to tender. But we will be taking account of the department roadmap for full return to school and to see how we can accommodate those proposed measures as part of the existing school design. So there's a number of items there listed in the bottom part of that slide, which talks about looking at minimising enhanced surface contact, which might involve automatic doors, automatic taps, and various things. I don't need to go down through it, but it's basically reducing the the risk of exposure within the school. We will be asking our design teams, and our design teams have already begun the process with the PSDP in terms of re-looking at design decisions that have been made as part of the design risk assessment process that would have informed the ultimate design. So they need to reevaluate some of those and to see what alternative measures can be accommodated. Now that obviously isn't straightforward because the design is fixed. We've gone out to tender, but we will still be looking at that and engaging with the department to see how maybe some of those measures can be accommodated. In relation to the design team's impact in terms of fulfilling their role on site, the big impact there is having to go to site and carry out inspections and to fulfill their obligations in terms of BCAR. So they'll obviously be looking to minimise the amount of visits, but it's hugely important, and we'll be keeping a close eye to make sure that adequate inspections will be taking place by all our designers. So they're the principal design measures that have been considered. So we'll move on to the next slide, and which it shows the ground floor plate for the school. So the yellow and the black arrows on the visual give an indication of how the floor plan, without any changes, can accommodate reducing the risk of exposure within the school. It allows generous circulation landing areas. It comprises 2 stairwells, so one could be used for entry and one for exit. So the school is well set up at the moment, despite existing layout, to accommodate measures in relation to reducing the COVID impact. But there's obviously other things that we need to look at in conjunction with the department. So next slide, Conor, please. So looking at where the project is at the moment and looking at a key piece of advice that has come out from the OGP in July 28th, which looks at the particular situation that the project is at, which is tenders received, but the letter of acceptance has not been issued. So the guidance, I've tried to simplify the guidance provided by the OGP in this image here. By no means should it be taken as leading on how to deal with a project in this particular situation. There's a lot more detail in the guidance that needs to be considered, and various references as well. So in summary, the key aspects of that need to be considered is the guidance acknowledges that the return to work safely protocol will have an impact, and it's how we deal with that at this particular stage of the procurement. So the first thing to do is to understand whether or not that impact is substantial or not. If the impact is substantial, the difficulty there is keeping aligned with the award public authority contracts regulations SI 284/2016, because the impact, as in the cost, is above a certain threshold. It's unlikely to be aligned with those provisions in regulations. So the first point will be to seek advice and to see what can be done in that situation. But there's a high probability that you could be looking at re-tendering. If the impact is not significant, as in if the cost impact is less than those thresholds, there's two scenarios that could be looked at here. One is if in the situation where tenders have not been notified, and the other one in the tenders that where notification has been given. I'll go through the not notified, even though the one that's relevant to the project is where the tenders have been notified. In the case of the not notified, all tenders will be asked to stand over their price. If they come back and they say they all stand over their price, then the procurement process can continue towards issuing the letter of acceptance. If not, again, you're down the route of looking for advice to determine which the best way forward is. In the situation where tenders have been notified, the lowest tender will have to be asked. I think there might be a typo there in the slide, but in the case where the tenders have been notified, they would be asked to stand over their. They would all be asked to stand over their price. Yeah, so I made a mistake there. So the first ones where the tenders are not notified, it just goes to the apparently successful tender, and they're asked to stand over their price. In the case where the tenders have been notified, they all need to be asked if they would stand over their price. And again, if they stand over the price, the process can continue in terms of issuing the letter of acceptance. However, if any of those come back and say they won't stand over the price, again, we're into the seek advice. So you can see any of the pathways that have been mapped out there, they all lead potentially to an uncertainty in terms of how to proceed. And the risk varies with each of those decision routes as well. So that's the key point, I suppose, where we're at the moment in relation to the project. We have other discussions taking place at the moment with the department before we can get properly into this space. But the guidance will be the framework to set out how we should proceed. Other things that have been considered would be in relation to the project would be pausing and potentially re-tendering. Pausing doesn't seem like a realistic option given the uncertainty that currently remains with COVID in terms of how long we are going to live with COVID. Other aspects that will have an impact on the project from COVID will be the relationships having an impact on trust, fatigue, and I suppose a certain nervousness and confidence, particularly from the design team in terms of wondering whether or not the project will continue as would have been originally planned. GDA itself is proactive in all of this on all our sites where we are looking to accommodate additional space or provide additional space for our contractors, as space is key to contractors being able to better manage and allow for those COVID measures. Another area would be the working hours in terms of looking for a derogation with the City Council in terms of allowing more time each day to be able to carry out the works. So that concludes my presentation, and I'll hand you over to Des Marmion.
Thanks, Porrick. My name is Des Marmion, Project Coordinator with GDA, responsible for the Residential Care Neighbourhood Project. That is the title of the project, Residential Care Neighbourhood. So referred to commonly as RCN. So if I slip into RCN speak, you know what I'm talking about. Just to give you an idea, to orientate the site in relation to the school, the bottom right-hand corner is effectively what the school is, the bottom southeast corner of the site. In red there you have the primary care centre, which is a HSC facility that's opened up in 2018. The site is bounded on its eastern boundary by two-storey domestic residential houses that back onto the site, which poses sensitivities in terms of planning and overlooking at setback distances, etc. Along the northern boundary, we have the North Circular Road. The three houses there are referred to as the doctors' houses. They're 20 built accommodation for professional staff that worked in St. Brendan's Hospital back in the day. And what you can't see there's actually an existing facility just to the east of the last house, which is St. Elizabeth's Court, which is an existing HSE facility, which accommodates about 20 clients. It's a mental health facility, an open mental health facility. Part of the project will include on the western edge of the site, of our site, of the RCN site, a green finger, which is basically a pedestrian cycle access way that will punch through onto the North Circular Road and connect down through into the heart of the campus. Along the southern boundary as well, we have Ivy Avenue, which is an on-campus road. So that's, in essence, the extent of the site. It's a brownfield site. There's a considerable amount of fill on the site, which we have to deal with. We've already done some testing on it, so it doesn't appear to be. It appears to be relatively inert, but there's a bit of work to be done there. Just moving on, I'm mindful of the time here, so I'm going to try and go through as quick as I can. Principal stakeholder, obviously, is the Health Service Executive. We're working very closely with HSE Estates, who are opposite number, shall we say, just our first line of contact with HSE. They then subsequently feed back into and organise end user groups within the HSE. The design team were separately appointed consultants. First of all, we have the architects, who are a partnership between the Cullomovan and Todd Architects, the civil structural engineers at DDFL, Mechanelect at BDP, quantity surveying services provided by WHC, and we have Atkins providing fire consultancy. The brief, as mentioned there, you've got the basic schedule accommodation at the moment has a floor area of 11,000 square meters, which include approximately 100 bedrooms, daycare centre that is used by the local community. We also have a retail stroke pharmacy unit that is located in the southwest part of the build onto Ivy Avenue and the Green Finger. And also there's the provision for HSE admin office space. It's obviously a public works contract, so we're procuring under the Capital Works Management Framework, and we've already gone through stage 1, and we're currently working our way through stage 2A, develop design. Connor, if you could move along on the next slide, please. Just in a nutshell, again, this is the slide as reoccurred on both Connor and Paul's presentations. In essence, our stage 2A was programmed to be complete with planning application or planning permission in place by August 2020. But obviously, when COVID-19 was unleashed upon us back in March, had a dramatic effect on how the project progressed. So we're now looking, our revised program has a stage 2A completion set for November this year and planning application in for November as well. And that'll be challenging enough. We're making good steady progress. Next slide, please, Connor. In terms of design, a big part of the HSE brief and a really critical aspect of the design is the HSE's desire to move away from the institutional feel of clinical code institutional feel for these facilities, and to try and encourage and adopt an approach that generates a feeling of a household, or like a home from home, bearing in mind the potential clients who will be living in this residential or the OCN will be older people coming towards the end of the latter part of their lives, and also people suffering from dementia. So creating that friendly, warm, livable kind of environment was very, very important. That was heavily stressed in the initial the tender, the brief for the architectural design process. So, and also just trying to stress and encourage submissions in terms of the innovation and design from the various architects who bid for the project. That has held us in good stead, actually, in terms of COVID-19, because obviously the household approach, and also which would be paramount in terms of design parameters for any healthcare facilities, it's all about infection control and how to manage and minimize transfer of infection in these facilities. So it's actually helped us a lot in the design. The next slide, which I'll come on to in a bit, will highlight that in terms of the extract from the winning submission. But in terms of feedback from the HSE, as I say, the design brief really kind of hits a lot of the infection control aspects on the head already. So the only kind of things that came back from HSE were to be able to further subdivide the households into smaller household units if the need be. Currently, we're looking at 20-bed stroke 25-bed household units within providing the total of about 100 beds in the overall facility. So that impact has been minimal on us. And also just looking at areas, common areas such as reception areas, how to protect staff, perhaps non-intrusive screening, open areas where people can reach the 2-meter social distancing. So all of that has been currently looked at in design, but minimal impact, I have to say, on floor design. What I've got here is the actual, it's an extract from the winning submission. And basically, what McCullough Mulvin and Todd's actually came up with was discrete household modular units. And what we have here is it's a 20-bed unit, effectively, a 2-story with 10 beds on one level, 10 beds on the other level. The diagram to the left illustrates the modularity and the flexibility of the approach. The other thing is good circulation, good ventilation, light, airy spaces, and also a discrete garden area that can be attributable to each household. So one of the important factors of the household as well is that minimizing through traffic. And in fact, anybody who's going to the household really should have business in the household. Again, that helps in terms of infection control, minimizing people coming through the facility and potentially transferring infection. Next screen, Connor, if you could, please. In terms of the actual project management impact, as we say, we're at stage 2A. So really, it's a lot of it is about consultation processes and stage 1 and design review. And through stage 1, we have quite an extensive series of end-user consultation meetings and workshops, which involve people meeting up in the flesh, in rooms, crawling over drawings, going through design aspects, etc. Obviously, with the COVID-19 impact, it's all basically transferred to an online system where any meetings, etc., are done via Teams, Microsoft Teams. And that's worked well with the design team. It's been a little bit difficult with the HSE because they themselves obviously have been caught up in the whole emergency response to the COVID-19. So their time is precious. It's been very difficult to get access to end users. That's the reality of the fact. But we're working through. One methodology we're using is that as opposed to having open workshops, we basically we take a discrete aspect of the design, we deal with HSE estates. They then take it to the end users, have their own internal workshop, and then it comes back through to us and the design team. There will be overall workshops online, but ultimately to review the overall design, there has to be a collective meeting of minds. But it's a little bit difficult and challenging. With regards to actual physical works on site, we were looking at most of our site survey works were completed before COVID-19 was unleashed. And we do have some survey works that we have to do. And basically the focus there is making sure that the RAMs include COVID-19 measures, and also that the operatives on site have done the CIF COVID-19 induction. Just note on a huge part of trying to manage the process is really connectivity with all parties, particularly HSE estates and the project design team. And that's about online meetings, picking up the phone, talking, keeping in touch, and trying to monitor the process. The design team have been very proactive and have been very helpful, and the whole spirit of burden and share has been obvious and evident. So we've been lucky. I mean, in the sense that we're working through the project as best we can. and it's obviously challenging for everyone involved, but we are working through it. I think I'll just finish up there because I'm just mindful of the time. So thanks for your time. I'm back to Conor.
Dave, Conor, Peter, that was, I think people found it very, very interesting. There's a high number of attendees and people have been very engaged in this. I am conscious that time is running a little bit with us. I do know that some of the questions that were coming up were very much focusing on your experiences and changes you had to make in relation to COVID. I think Des and Peter's presentations covered a lot of the issues that were raised. I might just put, there's one question there, which I think may be of interest to people. Were water flushing systems included in the design? And one of the challenges faced relates to the potential risk of Legionnaires' disease. Were buildings where buildings are left vacant for long periods of time, which obviously is an issue during COVID. Do you have any advice there regarding having those systems installed in all new builds? I don't know which one of you'd like to take that potentially.
Brigitte, can you hear me?
Yes.
Maybe I'll just jump in there in a general sense. Like one of the points I was making earlier on was that at our program team level in governance, we're working with, in the case of TU Dublin, with a discrete working group that focuses on issues like that. The site, there is a Grangegorman Estate Management Group that manages the site. So we haven't seen, so maybe to come at it in 2 points, the site, the building, the existing stock are maintained throughout the year effectively. So we haven't had that challenge. And we've yet to see a change like that come through in terms of briefing of new stock. But, you know, there will be other external influences on the use of water that might bring that, you know, the COVID has definitely amplified and accelerated a lot of change. But, you know, there could be other agendas around sustainability that will bring us towards waterless urinals, you know, for example. But sorry, we don't have any particular help on that, you know, Legionnaires or how to combat it or where that's headed.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that, Adrian. Like such, I think that may be useful to Louise who asked that question. I think we're just going to probably move on now to Peter's again. Thank you very much. I think, as I say, the attendee numbers kept up all the way through the presentation, which I always think is a very good sign that people are very engaged in what's going on. So again, thanks on everyone's behalf. I'm going to hand on now to Peter Hess from the Housing Agency. I just know we'll probably run another poll. So like when people get a chance, just as Peter's getting started there, I think this question, again, is COVID related, and that will come up there shortly. Again, it's just trying to gauge your own experiences in relation to it. So the poll is switch to the point you regard as the key to successful remote project management. So if you had a chance for a moment to answer that. And then otherwise, I'll hand over to Peter, who will tell us about the experiences that they've had with the Parish Remediation Scheme during COVID. Thank you, Peter. I need to unmute, I think, maybe. John might mute you there if you're not having difficulties.
I've been trying to unmute him, Brigitte, but I can't manage it. I'll keep trying.
Might be going back to Garber for another goal. That's like for the moment. Oh yeah, we're on green.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you very much. Thank you for the Project Managers Network for asking the Housing Agency to participate. Thank you to Brigitte, John, Eilish. Housing Agency was established in 2012, and as part of our mission, we have to mandated to implement effective housing programs. In the Housing Agency, we have a professional technical section comprised of architects, engineers, QSs, project managers, experienced construction professionals. Our project section helps local authorities take housing projects through from feasibility through to handover. We've worked on regeneration projects previously, but not on the scale of this pilot program. The procurement unit was established under the Rebuilding Ireland program in 2016. We offer specialist procurement advice to approved housing bodies and to local authorities. Our main role there is to assist approved housing bodies appoint consultants. We occasionally provide assistance or advice to the Department of Housing upon request. The Pirate remediation team was set up specifically to deal with the pirate problem. There is a sharing of skills across the project section, the procurement unit and the pirate remediation team. This is a photograph of some stone affected by pirate taken out from a building. Basically, it looks like it's when the stone is taken out, it's covered with a black dust. It's like a coal, which obviously with this, it wasn't the condition it went in. It's naturally occurring iron sulfide, and when pyrite is exposed to moisture or oxygen, there's a chemical reaction, and the stone expands. It pushes up and out. You may recall between 2004 and 2006, we were building about 70,000 houses per annum, and the problems of the use of pyrite under the floors became apparent between 2005 and 2007. This problem found its way to the Department of Housing, who are our sanctioning authority, and the department had a pyrite report panel report in 2012, which basically identified 5 quarries as the sources of the hardcore. Following on from that report, a Pirate Resolution Act came into place. This was the enabling legislation which provided the funding to allow homeowners to have their houses remediated. It was a scheme of last resort where there was no other alternative funding available. The Act established the Pirate Resolution Board, who were they'd set up the Pirate Remediation Scheme. They outlined the grounds for qualifying for admittance into the scheme, and they detailed how the scheme would operate. The role of the housing agency under the legislation was to administer the scheme and implement the scheme. The scheme, first applications were received in 2014, and the first remediation projects were completed in 2014. So there was an urgency about the scheme. Pirate is generally being encountered in the Greater Dublin area. In the main, Fingal and Meath, they account for about 80% of the applications we receive. Now, there was a theory that the tolls on the M50 actually prevented the migration of the contaminated stone further afield. Pirate affected a lot of buildings, wasn't just houses obviously, but from our point of view, affected one-off houses. They were often large floor areas with high specification. The scheme tried to replace like with like, but there were cost limits on particular elements such as floor finishes or fireplaces or worktops and kitchens. The bulk of our work was carried out in housing estates. We also carried out some works in apartments. Apartments posed particular challenges in dealing with common areas. We also contractors had to maintain access for the overhead users, apartment owners who weren't on the ground floor. The Pirate Remediation Board had set up an online application procedure for homeowners. We had to go through an assessment, verification and recommendation process, and that was based on the actual damage and the damage condition rating. A damage condition rating of 2, where the damage was caused by pirate, would allow an applicant to become a scheme participant. At that point in time, the housing agency would enter into a homeowner agreement with the scheme participant, and as part of that agreement, a remedial works plan for the particular property had been drawn up by the consultant design professionals, and that formed the basis for the homeowner agreement. The scheme also allowed provision for the homeowner scheme participant to receive reimbursement for alternative accommodation for while the works were being carried out, and they also had some storage costs met. As part of our procurement strategy, we set up frameworks. Frameworks are suitable for a large number of projects with similar characteristics, elements of repetition, which was absolutely appropriate for the Pirate Remediation Scheme. The original framework was set up in 2014 for consultant design professionals and works contractors, initially for 2 years, extended then for another 2 years. In 2018, we set up the second framework. We have four consultants and 5 works contractors. The works contractors package is currently divided into 2 lots, one for smaller projects and one for a greater number of projects. In general, we have projects in lot 1, more than 7 units. We have had up to 50 is the max. The Pirate team within the housing agency, program manager John Murphy, he leads the team. He's responsible for the planning and the programming of the scheme. and he's also the point of contact between the Housing Agency and the Pirate Remediation Resolution Board. He attends their board meetings. The project managers, Martin Lynch has been with the scheme since the start. Stephen Thompson and Aidan Dullard are the other two project managers. They are the primary contacts between the homeowners, the consultants and the works contractors. They are there at the very start, talking to the homeowners about the problems at the start, and they are there at the very end to make sure that after the works contractors have left that all defects are sorted out. The Pirate Finance team, Hobby Lynch, the leader there, along with Lana Tanham and Jackie Berkery, they're in the full front line dealing with all the scheme participants. You'll appreciate the homeowners are anxious to have the works carried out, but they want to know when it will be done, whether they're in the scheme, when it will get paid, or all of the other difficulties of dealing with a public interest. They financially make sure that the right amounts of money are paid to the right people at the right time. They also report back into the finance section of the Housing Agency. And that finance team also deals with maintaining records for audit purposes. We have an engineer, Fiona Fleming. She is responsible for organising the testing of properties. She reviews the results to make sure that the properties qualify for inclusion into the scheme. And together with the programme manager, she sits down and packages the approved properties into contracts that are viable for both the consultants and the contractors. Since 2016, we've brought on a resident engineer to ensure consistency across the scheme. Bob Fitzpatrick visits the sites on a regular basis, records what's there, monitors and reports on the site issues or any issues arising to the project managers and also to the design teams. The design teams are responsible for the monitoring of the project, but we thought it best to have an employer role in that as well. In terms of IT systems used, we've mentioned already the online application system. There's an access database that is able to track where each particular participant is, where projects are. Sage is used for the accounting function. We use Excel for program project tracking. It's not sophisticated, but it is sufficient for our needs. We use Microsoft Office 365. And when we set up the original framework, all tenders were based on paper. Since that time, we've moved into e-tenders, using technology, consultants and contractors. But by the very nature of the scheme, the works contractors that we're dealing with are not particularly big contractors. They were the last stumbling block to move to the e-tenders process, but it's commonplace now. In terms of cost control and governance, every year the Housing Agency submits a detailed application to the Department of Housing through the PRB in the middle of the year, so it's set out what we expect to require for the following year. The Department of Housing approves the annual budget for the scheme, hopefully, and with a target delivery of units. So there is a target and there is an amount of money to be spent. We report monthly to the Pirate Resolution Board. Before any contract, any works contract is entered into, or any consultant contract is entered into, approval is received from the PRB. There's also a joint audit and risk committee made up of members of the Housing Agency Board and the PRB. The Controller and Auditor General has included the Pirate programme in its audit of the Housing Agency every year. During the course of the programme, we had several consultants come in to review what we're doing, and to date there hasn't been any major issues. The Housing Agency Pirate Remediation team have an overall tracker system that brings all of the projects together, so we're able to see how it all consolidates, where we are at a particular point in time and what the future looks like. In terms of tenant returns, either from consultants or works contractors, they're monitored on an individual basis. This graph here, the middle line, tracks the average total cost per property between 2014 through to 2018. The same pattern continued in 2019. 2019, it was all less than 80,000 per unit. And at the same time, the Chartered Surveyors Tender Price Index from start of 2014 to start of 2019 went up 36%. So in terms of cost control, the scheme has actually beaten inflation. So we're quite satisfied with that. Our project is slightly different from our Grangegorman colleagues in that there's a geographical spread of about 75, 80 kilometres from. Our most westerly was in Eden Derry, most easterly Balbriggan. So we have a lot of projects running concurrently with different design teams and different contractors. The projects are all at different stages. On any one week, you could have somebody starting in a house, and the same week would have somebody leaving a house. In December 2018, we were working on 250 houses at that single point in time. A requirement of the project is that there is speed of delivery. We want to minimise the time that people are out of their houses. Contractors have to be well organised, and there is no waiting around for a celebrity architect to come up to decide on the colour of the tiles. Speed is of the essence. Consultants and works contractors have different standards. Some consultants would be pretty good on their preparation of the remedial works plan. Others would be better on their contract administration. Other works contractors, excellent on groundworks, might not be so good in finishes. So we had to try to bring a common standard of consistency to the programme. That's why we introduced the resident engineer. These are some photographs of what happens in a typical house. If you can imagine 2 or 3 weeks before this house was lived in by a family. The photograph on the bottom right-hand side shows a conveyor belt. In this situation here, a lot of the internal walls were stud partitions, so they've been removed so as to allow the work contractor to increase his platform. The photograph on the top left-hand side, that shows a bobcat where all of the stone has been taken out. It's essential for the success of the scheme for the housing agency to have confirmation from the consultants that all of the contaminated stone has been removed. So it's taken to registered landfills by registered hauliers. As the work progresses, we bring in top photograph left-hand side, brings in clean new stone, and as we move on, insulation boards before slab down. This is the outcome. This is what a finished house on handover looks like. But more equally important, from the homeowner's point of view, they get this sample certificate as shown, a certificate of remediation. The remediation has to be carried out in accordance with IS 398. And that certificate is signed off by both the consultant and the works contractor. The consultant has certified at different stages of the process where that the works have been properly carried out. From a homeowner's point of view, if they want to sell their house or at least produce evidence of the pirate has been removed. Again, I've 2 more photographs of houses being handed over. We try to hand them over in showroom condition. Obviously, there might be some problems after handover. Contractors have always shown a willingness to come back and address any issues that have arisen. This is a scheme overview. By the end of 2019, we handed back 1,800 properties in the space of 4 or 5 years, and €122 million had been spent on the scheme by the end of that year. You might ask, what were the benefits to the taxpayer of this scheme? When the scheme was commenced, the houses that people were living in were becoming uninhabitable. While the damage would start on the floor, it would progress to walls, and if doors don't close, kitchen units start to fall away. The houses were just not possible. They weren't going to get any better. At the same time, a lot of these houses had been bought at a particular high point in the market, and they were now had negative equity problems. So the stress and strain on homeowners and families was immense. By the 2019, Mazars consultants came in and had a look at the properties at that time that we'd remediated. It was just 1040. Of the 122 of the remediated properties had been sold since remediation, and 114 properties were sold above market value. So in effect, the taxpayers' money has stopped a waste of previous investment and has returned value to properties, and people could continue to live in their properties. So that is seen as the benefit of the scheme. As you can see, we ramped up from 2013 from a very low base through to 2019. 2019 was our peak year in terms of spend and output. In terms of expenditure, contractors obviously account for most of the money, 84%. Homeowner expenses account for 8%, and consultants account for 5%. Consultants would suggest they're offering good value for money. By the end of 2019, before COVID arrived, we were reasonably satisfied that we had effective operational systems in place. The numbers were being delivered. The budget was being spent. The frameworks were being extended. We were happy with the contractors and consultants that we had. The frameworks did include a mechanism for removal of a warning and removal system for removing consultants and contractors that weren't performing. We don't envisage that being used. The budget for 2020 had been approved. We were expected to deliver 2,000 properties by Q1 2020. At the end of 2019, we were a target of 460 had been set based on a budget of 32 million. By the end of that fourth quarter, we realised that we weren't going to spend the 32 million approved, but we did put a major push on to bring more units into 2019. So by the end of at the quarter four of 2019, we moved from a target of 110 to actually completing 155. So total 511 was completed for 2019. That had an unexpected consequence later down the road in that it mitigated the result of the COVID for us. I've just had a chronology of events here just to recollect where we were. Basically, the first government direction applied from the 28th of March, and then it work on non-essential sites ceased and contractors closed the site on that date. They were extended on the 4th of May for a further period, and again on from 10th of April and 1st of May. In total, the sites were closed down for 7 weeks. I just left that slide in so as to indicate the degree of uncertainty there was across society as to how things were going to progress. Before lockdown, but in expectation of lockdown going to happen, the programme manager took the following actions. Where we had received letters or tenders, but no letter of acceptance had been issued, we held back on issuing those tenders. That included 4 contracts totaling 73 dwellings. We told the scheme participants and homeowners that the works contracts were being put on hold. The last thing we wanted was to have people out of their houses and then a lockdown happening with houses not finished. Distance. The same time before lockdown, the taking of the core samples required to confirm the presence of pirates ceased. Obviously, homeowners were very reluctant to allow strangers into their houses. By the time lockdown happened, and I just left this as a point of comparison, on the 1st of December 2019, we had 13 contracts on site, and we were working on 113 properties. By the end of March 2019, we had 3 contracts on site, including 84 properties. But actually, these contracts were nearly complete, and the actual number of houses remaining to be completed was 20. So if we were to pick at any point in time since the start of the programme to March 2019, this was if there was such a thing as a good time, this was the time for us to have a close down. Obviously, the pirate remediation scheme doesn't operate in a vacuum. We're part of the housing agency. And the IT response to the housing agency was critical to the continuation of the pirate remediation scheme. In February, we had 45 employees using laptops. They might have worked 1 or 2 days a week from their house. At the moment, we have, between a combination of laptops and desktop computers, we have 120 people working remotely. The IT organisation had to organise purchase of docking stations, laptop stands, furniture. It was an impressive performance in a very short space of time. They'd also installed Microsoft Teams, had in place Skype for Business early on 2020. Another part of an issue for the pirate remediation team was the diversion of work phones to work mobile phones, so as to allow continuity of contact, particularly with homeowners. There's some purchase of phones. The housing agency IT section prioritised the pirate section for continuity of service. The department also asked the assistance of the housing agency to assist in designating extension projects. These were projects where works could continue. In general, they tended to be local authority housing projects that were near completion and would have only required a couple of weeks to get these houses ready for habitation. The department did not want houses near complete waiting for an undetermined amount of time. The immediate response of the pirate section was to start commencing working from site. The project managers maintained communication with the homeowners. That was a priority. The online systems, application systems remained active. Obviously, all sites were ceased and all sites were made safe. Using the essential projects provision, we were able to identify 13 houses that we asked the contractor involved to continue to completion. Those houses were actually completed during the lockdown period. We also asked all homeowners to submit all invoices and insurances by electronically. The consultants had to stop surveying properties for their preparing their remedial works plans, and also in the case of where houses have been handed over and there may still have been some defects, consultants had to hold off and visiting those houses. We held regular online meetings between the priority team for communication and work review, so as to let everybody kept themselves informed as to where we were. We did put an electronic payment system in place. We rolled out, the pirate section piloted out an e-signatures process, which is now incorporated throughout the housing agency. There was a backlog filing which was brought up to date. And together with the project section and the procurement unit, the pirate section put into adopting a protocol and procedures for housing agency staff visiting sites post-COVID-19. That's been adopted into the housing agency health and safety procedures. We continue to issue tenders for works contractors, amending the works requirements to include for expectations of dealing with COVID in the future. Our own staff completed the CIF online COVID training, and we also, together with our Grangegorman colleagues, we took cognizance of the guidance documents by the OGP, in particular the guidance that allowed for ex gratia payments for contractors to help their cash flow. Now, luckily enough, we only had one contractor on site where we had to do that, but it did help his situation. The other contractors were waiting for work to come, so they were again in an unfortunate situation. We also went ahead and purchased additional personal protective equipment, including hand sanitizers. Before contractors went back to site, we reopened 3 sites. The protocols were put in place. Most contractors had carried out their CIF, their personnel carry out CIF online training. We would have asked for construction stage health and safety plan and COVID-19 site management plan prepared by the contractors to be reviewed by the PSDP. The PSDP was part of the consultant design professional brief. All contractors had to appoint COVID-19 compliance officers, change working conditions. The 2-meter social distancing was particularly difficult. In any house handover situation, you might have plasterers, painters, electricians, kitchen fitters all working in the one house. That was no longer possible. They also had to bring on board their own personal protection equipment. The impact on the programme, apart from slowing down productivity for the works contractors, we had to introduce a deep cleaning period. Previously, the experience would have been that the houses would have been cleaned and within 24 hours handover. Where our handover procedure now calls for basically 3 days between the clean and the handover. Again, we took on board the OGP guidance and documentation, the guidance, cost and programme adjustment. These are photographs of typical situations. Signage was all important, setting out routes, the procedures to be followed, hand sanitation, station setup. With the house remediation programme, it is not the same as a site setup for projects such as our Grangegorman colleagues. It is a moving feast, and that presented particular difficulties, particularly where contractors aren't working in the one location where you don't have houses contiguous to one another. In terms of return to the site, we've moved to meetings held remotely where possible, Zoom, Teams. We use technology for site inspection. We ask for works contractors to send photographic records of works completed. The design team still has to go to see particular elements of the work, but we maximise the use of the information and IT that's available. Any site visits, we keep them to a minimum. We advise the contractor in advance. We control proximity. There's no more site meetings with 10 people sitting in an office. No lengthy site meetings, and the record keeping is all important. As part of our protocol, any housing agency site staff member visiting a site, be it pirate related or otherwise, they are required to send an email recording the visit, the details including who they've met, to our own internal email address. We also kept up constant communication with the homeowners and scheme participants, letting them know when they were back in their homes and confirmed that all measures were in place to allow a safe handover. To deal with the process that hadn't started, we had to confirm in writing with the homeowners, and we followed up with a phone call, that they would be happy to move out, and so to allow works contractors commencing works. That was a concern, a risk that we might end up with homeowners looking to move out, but in the event, they were all happy to move on and let us carry on with our programme. We had a look at documents that had been issued during the tender period and had a look at what the additional works requirements were being imposed by the COVID-19 with the consultants. Our consultants helped us with that. We were in a situation where we did not want to re-tender, and we did not want a further delay of the programme. We wanted a requirement for cost certainty. Before we intervened, we had a look, we talked to, in the situation of the tenders, we talked to the lowest tender, where tenders letters of acceptance had not been issued. We got them to stand over their tender, but we also at the same time agreed to the costs of the additional imposition. Now, the fact that we had built up good relationships over the costs of the framework, and the contractors are very anxious to resume work, we came to a very reasonable agreement, we feel, with that process. There was a different situation where we had one contractor had a spread of houses spread over 6 or 7 different locations. His situation would have additional cost to a situation where contractors are getting 10 or 20 houses in the same estate. We were able to issue the letters of acceptance to works contractors very, very speedily. The consultants resumed the preparation of remedial works plans. We were also able to carry on with collecting the core samples that would allow the works packages put together. We had a look at the programme. We reviewed, adjusted and adapted the plan and the rollout of the delayed projects. The impact of COVID-19 on the pilot programme. Our budget of 2020 is 20 million. We expect to deliver 260 units. As of September 2020, we only have 6 contracts on site. We haven't really got back up to full speed. Our projection is that we will do well to spend to complete 200 units and to spend 15 million by the end of the year. That's the aim. That milestone delivery of 2,000 units that we anticipated for Q1 2020, that's probably not going to happen until to October 2020. That's pretty disappointing, but again, completely outside of our control. The learned outcomes. I think taking the early action mitigated the consequences of COVID-19 close down for that programme. Our dependence on information technology is established. We continue to operate effectively while working remotely. Our use of paper is minimal. We have to go into the office maybe 1 day a week. Project managers to go in to issue the homeowner agreements that still have to be signed manually. The fact that we had frameworks in place with experienced consultants and experienced works contractors allowed the programme to continue operating. They knew what they were at. It wasn't a stop-start. I think we used the opportunity to adapt and improve our processes, and that will be used into the future. The Pirate scheme would rely heavily on the cooperation and help of our colleagues in the Pirate Resolution Board. We would also have good relationships with the Department of Housing. Sarah Neal from the Department of Housing was very instrumental in the early days, setting up some of the systems that we have in place. We'd also have excellent relations with the Office of Government Procurement. Michael Farrington, the OGP, was Programme Manager for the Pirate scheme for a couple of years. So in conclusion, we did keep the scheme fully operational. Works and handovers of homes proceeded safely. None of our sites, touch wood, have had to close down. And I would the lesson to be learned from this is that the public sector can adapt and continue to deliver large-scale programs successfully on time and within budget, given the right structure, the right tools, and the right people with the appropriate skill set. Thank you.
Peter, thank you very much for that. I think it's fascinating, and I suppose the timing was good in relation to you having gone further last year with your numbers than you had this year, so that was a fortunate coincidence in this context, but I think it's very useful to see how you've managed to keep the scheme going and made progress in that regard. I am conscious time is running away with us a little. There's just maybe one question there, and maybe put it to the panel, maybe to Conor first or to Peter. It's in relation, I think it's probably linked to the public spending code, but as Maiden saying, Conor, you mentioned spend in excess of 100 million requires cabinet approval. Peter mentioned approval from the Pyrite Remediation Board before contracts entered into. Presume there is some delegated authority that applies? Question mark. Thank you. So I don't know, maybe Conor or Peter or both may want to come in on that. I think it probably overlaps with the public spending code, etc.
Brigetta, sorry, I missed the core of the question there. Projects over 100 million that require deeper approval. What was the?
Yeah, you mentioned spend in excess of 100 million requires cabinet approval. Peter mentioned approval from the Pyrite Remediation Board before contracts entered into. Presume there is some delegated authority applied. I think it's probably linked to the public spending code and the limits that are set out there. And I think you mentioned in the presentation, Conor, changes that were happening to the public spending code and how they have been helpful in the context of the projects that you're undertaking, etc.
Yeah, so maybe just very quickly, Peter, in our context, we're running like a range of capital projects out of different values, anywhere between 0 and 5 million, 10 million to 100 and 100 plus. And the new revised public spending code at the end of 2019 and really coming into effect at the beginning of 2020, it's a very clear document in that it sets out the life cycle and the decision gates that are needed. So in our case, we're operating within the Department of Education. So we would have, for example, the Academic Hub project that we showed you there would have gross cost below 100 million, but we have a governance approvals forecast that brings us through the whole range of, from project team to program team to a subcommittee from the GDA board. And we bring the Department of Education Oversight Committee along with us. So it's like a steeplechase of governance. And what we've tended to do is try and construct a good solid paper that describes the project and hits the requirements of the public spending code. And we bring that up through the levels of governance with the intention of squeezing the brains, to be perfectly honest, of those various boards that we and sponsoring agencies that we present to improve the quality of the paper and to streamline the governance. So maybe that's a bit long-winded, but the public spending code sets out those bandwidths and certainly is very clear about the distinction between sub 100 and above 100. And we tend to try and put a governance structure that is fit for purpose. You know, so obviously if we're doing a project, it's proportionate, the layers of governance, but we tend to try and invest in a decent paper structure.
Thank you, Conor, for that. Just to reference again, the public spending code is on the DECO website. Equally, if you'd like to have a look at the project management handbook that Action 10 has produced, that's again on the OPS website. It'll cross-reference with the public spending code, so that will be of use. I think Des has just indicated to me that he has a question as well he'd like to come in on.
Thanks very much, Bridget, and thanks again, colleagues, for the presentations. I suppose the first thing may comment before the question, and I suppose the comment really is, it's just so encouraging to see the approach has been taken, ultimately directed at achieving better public outcomes, and that's very manifest through the range of projects that were shown to us in the Grangegorman Development, but also through the very specific, if you like, response through the Pyrite scheme. My question, I suppose, were kind of to garner any thoughts colleagues have in terms of actually embedding the kind of project-based approach and the things they've described in their two organisations. This is, I suppose, something which we have been asked to work on through OPS 2020, and it comes through in a very kind of manifest way the effort sustained over a period to do what these two sets of projects and organisations are concerned with. So thoughts really on how you embed that on either a changing or indeed a consistent team, and I suppose what initiatives are you taking into the future to maintain the kind of approach. And if I could ask you within that, obviously the kind of governance and the reporting arrangements that you have are geared towards those better public outcomes, but do you face challenges in terms of getting full organisational or acceptance across all parties to participate in what can often be seen as something which is not necessarily, it's not an end in itself, but it's a means to a better end when you have these reporting and other arrangements. Thanks very much.
Conor or Peter, do you have any thoughts in that regard?
If I'll offer a few words, can you hear me?
Peter, thank you.
I think that the confidence that the scheme is using the capital works management, I can only speak for the pirate scheme. The confidence that we're using the capital works management framework reassures the other stakeholders that all of the mechanisms are in place to have cost control, this transparency, all of the requirements of procurement. And if there is a tracked record in our situation, we would have the certification issued by the consultants and the works contractors at the end of a handover, that there is a measurable outcome. That does give confidence to either, in our case, Pirate Resolution Board or the Oversight Committee of the Department, that the scheme is being implemented effectively. And in our case, we have had the Department coming back to ask us, how have we used the framework, that they might use it in other rollouts of other projects across local authority areas. So if you are able to demonstrate effectiveness and delivery, that does give the confidence.
Peter, I don't know, Conor, do you have any final words in that regard?
Just to add that, I guess one of the things we definitely try to do in the agency is to keep talking to each other. We talk a lot. There's a lot of communication, and that in and of itself can require a huge amount of stamina. And you know, we're by no means experts, but we are. Sometimes we do it well, sometimes we do it badly. Continuously trying to loop back in experience, you know, and reflect on the structure, you know, the organizational design, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, I guess this isn't very specific, Des, or it isn't very, maybe it's not a very useful reaction to what you said, but it's the high degree of communication that I think stands in our stead in the agency in at least some of the improvements that we tend to make with respect to processes.
Thank you, Conor, for that. I don't know, Des, if you want to say something to that? Or?
Thanks. Look, I suppose it's we're all learning as we go along, and I think certainly the emphasis on communications is one which we probably identified all right as part of our work programme, and we've probably been hitting it indirectly rather than directly. So the case studies, the network itself, the handbook, and then the focus on other things have, I suppose, indirectly allowed us to approach the area of communications while we haven't actually, and training of course as well. So I think maybe it kind of prompts us maybe to look at that maybe more fully as an area. It's a very obvious one in one sense, but on the other hand, as Conor I think has highlighted, it really is the lifeblood of, I suppose, the organisational success and thus, you know, better outcomes.
Okay, I think just as well, just in case colleagues aren't familiar, all the materials and resources that have been developed by Action Team 10 are available on the OPS 2020 page under the deeper to the portal there, and they contain the handbook, case studies, etc., which people may find interesting. And as Deb says, it's still a work in progress. I think given that time is passing us by, I think I'm going to hand over to Brigadier General Adrian Morricu, who will bring proceedings to a close.
Just going to jump in for a second. That website there at the bottom is where you'll get all of your project management resources. Okay. Okay.
Thanks for that. Adrian.
Thanks very much, Bridget and John. And I'm very conscious of people needing to be fed so that they can face the afternoon. I did have some comments, but I'll save them for our internal hot wash. I really want to thank our speakers, Conor, Porrick and Des from the GDA and Peter from the Housing Agency. It's obvious you put a lot of work and preparation into our presentations today. Appreciate it. I think a lot of food for thought, especially for those of us that have not previously been involved in those particular workspaces. I want to particularly thank the Action 10 PMN subgroup, particularly John, Brigitte, Eilish and Dara and all the other members. And just to point to our participants, we have members in that subgroup from the LGMA, OPW, Health, OGP, Agriculture, Deeper, and obviously Defence, which chairs. But I suppose if we're trying to achieve anything in OPS 2020, it's that real cross-public service collaboration, and my thanks and appreciation on my own behalf and on behalf of my co-sponsors for Des Dowling on that. So plenty of food for thought from today. We'll be in touch about our next PMN event in due course. In the meantime, bon appetit for a nice lunch. Have a good week and bye-bye.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you, everyone. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.